Just before we start this morning, a number of you may have been wondering what the inquiry's position will be following the Prime Minister's statement over the weekend that he proposes to put proposals before Parliament on Wednesday. I'll make a statement about this, saying what we propose to do in the light of current knowledge at the close of proceedings today.
So this morning, sir, we have Professor Preston. Are you able to hear me, Professor Preston?
Yes. Do I need to put a mask on?
You don't? No.
I do, because I shan't be saying very much. Can you hear me all right? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Right. Well, I won't be saying very much. I'll be wearing a mask. Everyone else here is wearing a mask, except for you. You don't have to. And Miss Richards, who's asking you the questions.
Thank you.
Now, before we start, we're going to ask you to take the oath. You want to affirm, I understand, and Mary will now ask you to affirm.
I don't mind doing it. Well, what do I do?
No, you watch the screen.
Please state your full name.
Francis Eric Preston.
And repeat after me. I do solemnly, sincerely.
I do solemnly, sincerely.
And truly declare and affirm.
And clearly declare and
Affirm.
defend. Oh, offend.
Affirm.
Oh, affirm. Sorry, I couldn't hear you. Affirm.
Let's do this. That's probably better. That the evidence I shall give.
That the evidence that I shall give.
Shall be the truth.
Shall be the truth.
The whole truth.
The whole truth.
And nothing but the truth.
And nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Professor Preston, I'm going to be asking you some questions. And from time to time, I'll be referring to some documents. You've got documents, I think, with you in paper form. And when I refer to documents, your wife is going to find the paper copy and provide it to you. Okay?
Okay. Yes.
So I'm just going to start with a few questions about your career. After you qualified as a doctor, I understand that you worked in the Royal Army Medical Corps for a number of years. Is that right?
Correct.
And that was from 1964 to 1972, according to your CV. Is that where you developed an interest in haematology, or did you already have that interest?
No, that's when I developed an interest in haematology.
And did you train in haematology at all whilst you were in the Royal Army Medical Corps?
No, when I was in the Royal Army Medical Corps, I was a haematologist.
And then when you came out of the Royal Army Medical Corps, you took up a post, first of all, as a senior registrar in haematology at the Sheffield Royal Infirmary. Is that right?
Correct.
And then in, I think, around 1974, you were appointed a consultant in haematology, to start with at the Royal Infirmary, and then that moved to the Royal Hallamshire Hospital in Sheffield.
Correct.
I think to start with, Professor Blackburn was still working with you, and he was the director of the Sheffield Centre in the 1970s when you joined.
Yes.
And then did you take over from Professor Blackburn when he retired?
Yes.
Do you recall roughly the year when you became director of the Sheffield Centre?
No.
We can see that Professor Blackburn stopped attending the reference centre director meetings in about 1980. Do you think that might have been the point at which you took over as director?
Possibly.
Okay. If you don't remember, don't worry.
I don't remember.
And you remained director at the Sheffield Haemophilia Centre until your retirement in 2000.
Correct.
You were also a member of the UKHCDO, and you'd attend the annual meetings and the reference centre director meetings.
Yes.
And I'll come and ask you a few further questions about that at a later stage, Professor. And you were part of the UKHCDO's Hepatitis Working Party for, I think, many years. And then it became the Chronic Liver Disease Working Party, and you chaired that.
Yes.
Your CV also tells us that you were part of the Haemophilia Society's Medical Advisory Panel from 1988 to 1995.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to be asking you questions about events a long time ago, I know, Professor. If you're able to, can you tell us a little about the facilities at the Sheffield Haemophilia Centre in the 1970s when you were working there as a consultant?
The facilities. Gosh. I'm not quite sure what you're asking for.
Well, it might be quicker if I read to you a description that's been given to us by Professor Macris, who you worked with for many years from 1987 onwards. He's
Yes.
told us what the centre was like when he joined, and perhaps you can that will help. So I'll read his description.
Thank you.
He says that when he started in July of 1987 as a general haematology trainee, although the name of the Sheffield Haemophilia Centre existed, this was a virtual rather than a physical entity. Patients were seen and clinics were held on the haematology ward, Ward P2. He says that the care was overseen by 2 haematology consultants. You were the director of the centre and the consultant in charge of haemophilia, and Dr. Mike Greaves covered haemophilia when you weren't available, but that Dr. Greaves otherwise concentrated on thrombosis and general haematology. And then he adds, there were no junior staff dedicated to haemophilia, but the team of haematology juniors covered the service in the same way as they covered the patients with leukemia. Does that sound an accurate description to you, Professor?
Yes, that is accurate.
And although Sheffield, I think, had always been a reference centre, you told the Lindsay Tribunal, when you gave your evidence to that tribunal in Ireland in 2001, that Sheffield wasn't one of the larger centres. Is that right?
Correct.
We'll have a look in a moment, Professor, at some documents, the annual returns. But before I do that, there's just one document, Professor, I'm going to put on screen here, but you don't have a copy of it. I think your legal representative might have shown you a copy, but you and your wife don't have a hard copy of this document. Don't worry about that. I'm going to put it on screen so that people listening know it's a document that we have.
Okay.
Henry, it's RHAL 40824. My screen isn't showing me documents.
Oh, wait a minute.
Oh, it is now.
See
Can you see something
wow.
there? Right. So
Well, I can see something, but I have to lean forward to see it.
don't worry too much about the detail, Professor Preston. This is a document. It's a handwritten book, and it starts in 1976 and it goes through to 1981. So it runs for about 142 pages. And in it, it's got the name of patients. We've taken those names out or covered them up. The date of the nature of their diagnosis, whether they had haemophilia or von Willebrand's. And then it describes the treatment they were given, cryoprecipitate or Lister or cryobuline, the batch numbers and the reasons for the treatment. Now, all I wanted to ask you about this document, Professor, is this a record that shows the treatment that was given on the ward at the centre?
first of all, I can't see this. Well, I can see the document, but I can't read it. Could you just repeat the question, please?
Certainly. Was this book or a book like this used on the ward to record the treatment that patients received when they came to the ward and were treated in the hospital?
The treatment was given in a treatment room which was on the ward, but not in the ward. It was...
Carry on.
I'm not being very clear here. It wasn't in the ward. It was... Gosh, how do I explain it? It was inside the ward, but not in the ward.
Okay, so in a special room that was
Yes.
physically located on the ward, but not part of the general ward.
Correct. You were much better than I was.
That's all right. And the book we're looking at, and if you can't remember anything about the book, Professor, it's okay to say so. This appears to be, well, it's clearly a record of treatment, and I wondered whether you remembered if this kind of book was routinely kept to record every treatment that patients had on the treatment room.
Well, certainly full, complete records were kept of attendance, patients' attendance, and also their treatment.
Okay. Well, we can look at the book for ourselves, so I don't need to ask you anything further about the book. I'm going to put up on our screen now, Professor, some of the annual returns that were sent from Sheffield to Oxford, to Miss Spooner at Oxford and Dr. Ritzer in Oxford. I think you have these in hard copy form, and they should be your document number 2. But I'm not sure whether your wife was able to find those before, but if she can't find them, don't worry.
I've got them.
Great. Thank you very much, Mrs. Preston. Henry, could we have, first of all, the 1976 returns? That's HCDO 5047_009.
I might got to look at this.
So, Mrs. Preston,
Thank you.
yeah. So it's a Form A1, and it says Survey of Patients Treated at Haemophilia Centres in the UK, Annual Return for 1976.
Correct.
And we can see from this, it gives the total number of haemophilic patients treated during the year. It looks like 37.
Yes.
Number with factor VIII antibodies, 4.
Yes.
Total number of Christmas disease patients treated during the year, so that's haemophilia B, 7.
Yes.
And then we've got a list of the products that were used, the material used during the year, and we can see that it's 90,000 odd units of cryoprecipitate, and then 28,500 units of NHS factor VIII.
Yes.
And then we can see there are 3 different commercial concentrates being used. So it's 65,610 units of the Armour factor VIII.
Yes.
And then a much smaller number, 6,960 units of the Haemophil.
Yeah.
And then 50,596 units of cryobulin.
Yes.
So in 1976, you were still using a lot of cryoprecipitate, but the centre had started using commercial concentrates as well as NHS concentrates.
Would you repeat what you've just said, please?
Of course. In 1976, we can see that the centre was still using a lot of cryoprecipitate.
Yes.
But it had started to use NHS concentrates and commercial concentrates.
Yes.
And then we can see that for patients with Christmas disease, the treatment was with NHS factor IX concentrate.
What did it say?
That's the
yes.
figure.
Yes.
135,790 units.
Yes.
And I think it's right, Professor, from all the documents we've seen, that the treatment for patients with haemophilia B, Christmas disease, pretty much always remained NHS factor 9.
Yes. Yes.
We'll then look at the annual returns for 1982. Henry, it's HCDO 40216
haven't got it.
underscore 008. We'll just get it on screen here, Professor, whilst we try and locate your copy.
Oh, it's on the screen. Sorry, my hearing aid's falling out. I can see it on the screen, can I? Yes.
It's
Yes.
the same.
Same document. Oh, that's fine.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Document.
Which do you want?
I don't know what you want. Yeah. Okay.
Give it to me.
You could,
Yeah, I can see that. Thank you.
great. So we can see here, this is the annual return for 1982. You're down as the director, and we can see the numbers of patients treated during the year. But if we then just look at the products that we used,
Yes.
we can see there's still some cryoprecipitate, 75 bags.
Yes.
But we've then got the figures for NHS concentrate, 220,750 units used in hospital,
Yes.
and 197,170 units used for home treatment.
Yes. Yes.
So we can see by this time there's obviously an established home treatment programme and NHS
Yes.
concentrates there being used. And then we can
Yes.
see, if we look down, there are 3 commercial concentrates being used. So we have the Armour Factor 8, 6,645 units in hospital, 148,900 units for home treatment.
Yes.
And then the Highland Factor 8 Haemophil, 8,940 units used in hospital, 265,430 units used for home treatment.
Yes.
And then Cryobulin, the Immunofactor 8, 84,310 units used in hospital, and 36,565 units used for home treatment.
Yes.
And then we look down the bottom of the page, we can see also that you're using, it says bovine/porcine factor 8 concentrate, and there's a
Yes.
figure of 106,500 in hospital. Professor
Yes.
Preston, can you remember, with the porcine factor 8, did you use that for patients with inhibitors only, or did you use it more widely?
No, just for patients with inhibitors.
And then we can see, it's not very clear, but we can see some other, we can see that you've used FIBA and then other materials, and you've got down DDAVP and Autoplex.
Yes.
I'll come back and ask you a bit more about DDAVP later.
Thank you.
And then there's one final set of returns, which is then for 1983. We'll just look at. And Henry, that is HCDO 40216 underscore 003.
No, I haven't got it yet.
So it's come up on the screen, if you're able to see that, Professor, or Mrs. Preston may be able to find a copy
Yeah,
for you.
He's got it.
Thank
yes,
you.
I've got it. I think I've got it. Yes, I've got it. Yeah.
Great. So this is the 1983 annual returns. We've got the number of patients treated during the year. So for haemophilia A, we've got 40 patients treated and one with von Willebrand's. And then we can see, if we look at the treatments used, cryoprecipitate, a small amount, 44 bags.
Yes.
NHS factor 8 concentrate, 166,160 used in hospital, 243,005 used for home treatment.
Yes.
And then again, we can see there are 3 different commercial concentrates being used. So Armour factor 8, it's not used at all in the hospital that year, but for home treatment, 119,030 units.
Yes.
The Highland Haemophil, again not used in the hospital at all, but 42,500 used for home treatment.
Yes.
And then the immunofactor 8 cryobuline, 193,660 units used in hospital, 120,296 units used for home treatment.
Yes.
And again, we can see you're using the porcine factor 8 and DDAVP towards the bottom of the page.
Yes, thank you.
I won't take you to the records for patients with haemophilia B, but sir, they do show a consistent use of the NHS factor 9 and they give the numbers.
Okay.
So it would appear, Professor, that the use of cryoprecipitate reduced very significantly in the second half of the 1970s into the 1980s. You moved from cryoprecipitate for haemophilia A patients to factor concentrates. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, I'm just going to ask you some general questions about your approach to treatment in the 1970s and early 1980s, Professor. I think it's right that you treated only adults and not children.
Correct.
And children were treated at the Sheffield Children's Hospital under Dr. John Lillyman.
Yes.
Now, you've said in your statement that decisions about which treatments or which products to use were down to you. You had the total control, is your words in the statement, over which products to use.
Yes.
Do you recall whether you were part of any local, regional group with other haemophilia centre directors in your region discussing products and treatment policies at all?
Would you repeat that, please?
Of course. Did you meet on a regular basis with other haemophilia centre directors in your region to discuss products?
I don't think so.
Do you remember where your regional transfusion centre was? Was it in Sheffield or was it somewhere else?
It was in Sheffield.
And did you have, as far as you can remember, regular meetings with the director of the local transfusion centre?
No, but there was a member of the transfusion centre who worked with us for a period of time. I can't recall the period of time, but it was quite a long time.
Okay.
But he was working with us in our department.
Okay. And then you've said in your statement that for patients with mild haemophilia A, the treatment you always sought to use was DDAVP. Is that right?
Could you repeat that, please?
Of course. With patients with mild haemophilia A, was
Yes.
DDAVP your treatment of choice?
Yes.
Your statement and your evidence to the Lindsay Tribunal suggests that you started using DDAVP as soon as you could, as soon as it was available.
Correct.
With patients with moderate haemophilia A, can you recall what your usual treatment for them would have been?
Would you repeat that, please?
Of course. For patients with moderate haemophilia A, what
Yes.
treatment would you usually have used?
I think initially we would try DDAVP, and if that was unsuccessful, then we would use factor VIII concentrate.
And then we've seen from the annual returns to Oxford that you used both NHS factor concentrates and commercial factor concentrates.
Yes.
How did you decide who would get the NHS concentrates and who would get the commercial concentrates?
I think we in preference, we would have preferred to have used the NHS concentrate, but there was insufficient material, and this is the reason we had to use commercial concentrates.
And what was the reason that you would have preferred to use NHS concentrates?
Because we thought it was safer.
Was that because you thought it was safer because of smaller pool sizes and volunteer donors?
We were confident it was safer with respect to viral transmission.
For patients with von Willebrand's disease,
Yes.
can you recall what treatment you would usually use for those patients?
I think it depends upon the severity, and initially we would use DDAVP, and if that was unsuccessful, we would use concentrate.
And then for haemophilia B patients, I think we can see from the documents you used NHS factor 9 concentrates.
Correct.
Now, it's clear that there was an established home treatment programme at the Sheffield Centre by the early 1980s. Do you have
Yes.
any recollection when the home treatment programme started?
No.
And do you remember, was there a system for patients on home treatment to record what treatment they'd taken?
Could you repeat that, please?
Was there a system for the patients who were treating themselves at home? Did they
Yes.
have to make a written record of their treatment?
Yes.
Do you remember whether patients on home treatment, did they tend to use more concentrates than patients who were just coming to the hospital?
I cannot remember that.
You've mentioned that the supply of NHS concentrates, that there wasn't enough. Do you remember whether you got your NHS concentrates directly from BPL at Elstree or from your regional transfusion centre?
Wow. No, I think I know the answer, but I'm not 100% confident.
Okay. What do you think the position is?
I think it came from. It did not come locally. It came from the
BPL. Okay.
BPL. Sorry, BPL. Yes.
In terms of cryoprecipitate, did you get that locally from the Sheffield Regional Transfusion Centre?
Cryoprecipitate we prepared ourselves.
Okay. And then in terms of the commercial concentrates, was there a contract with the pharmaceutical company that covered the whole region, or did you decide and make the arrangements with the pharmaceutical companies yourself?
We made our own arrangement with the pharmaceutical companies.
Okay. Now, I'm going to read again something that Professor Macris said in his statement about your approach to treatment. I'm going to read it aloud and ask you to comment on it. So, if I can find it. Yes. So, Professor Macris says this about your approach to treatment. He says that you always insisted on not putting all the eggs in one basket in case something happened with the supply chain, and so a number of different products would be used rather than just one product. Does that ring a bell?
That's absolutely correct. I'm surprised at his memory.
He says that you told him that many times.
Right.
And then he also says another aspect of your approach was that individual patients would be kept on the same concentrate and the same batch for as long as possible to minimise exposure to different blood donations. Is that correct?
Correct.
And then I wanted to ask you next about something you said in your evidence to the Lindsay Tribunal. So that is, Henry, it's LIND 40323. Mrs. Preston, it should be document number 1 in the documents that you have.
Bless you. Good.
Yeah, I'm in the wrong job. It's a lot of it.
Oh, is that it?
Is that the front? What number?
Yeah, that's
What
the...
number?
For me to read it, I have to lean forward. Am I allowed to do that?
Just a minute.
Of course you are.
I think it's here, love. Eric, it's here.
Yes, I've got it. Thank you.
That's great.
Is that the front page?
Wait a minute. Got it. I don't mean to that.
The page I want to go to is page 46, which is the last but one page.
Oh, I've got 241 and it goes to 282.
Oh, okay. It might be if you've got that page numbers, Mrs. Preston. Could you go look at page 234?
I don't have 234. It starts at 241.
If you look in the bottom right-hand corner, there's a little number. So
Oh, yeah. Got it.
goes 1 to
What
47.
number do you want?
Page
Number?
46.
Starting the chairperson.
No, it starts, the top of the page says, casting your mind back to 1985.
I've gone to page 36 in your
It's page 46.
46, sorry. Oh, the penultimate page.
Yeah.
Oh, cast it, yes. Got it.
So, Professor Preston, you look at it on hard copy or screen, whichever is easier for you. I just
Okay.
want, so it's about halfway down the page. I'm going to read out a question and answers. So,
Right.
Henry, if you go to the bottom half of the page, please.
Bottom of the page.
It's bottom half of the page. It's about halfway down.
Yes, I've got that.
And there's a question that begins, it says April 1984, and then it says this. And in terms of the frequency of administration of products,
Oh, I see. Yes.
how
yes.
would the frequency compare at your centre with other centres? And then the answer, so this was you, Professor Preston, I'm not sure about the frequency, but what I do know is that the amount of factor 8 or factor 9 concentrate per patient per annum was very much less than the majority of the other reference centres. It might have been the least, but I'm not sure. Certainly, we were very much lower than the majority. And then in your next answer, you make clear that you're describing the position ever since they, that is concentrates, were introduced in the mid-1970s. So my understanding, Professor, of your answers there is that you were saying to the Lindsay Tribunal that you tended at Sheffield to use a smaller amount of factor concentrates per patient than other reference centres. Is that right?
I think so.
Can
Nothing. Well, when you were reading out loud, I couldn't find it.
let me see. I don't know whether Mrs. Preston can help. It's just over halfway down the page, and it begins April
In terms
1984.
of frequency of administration.
That's it. Yes.
Look, it's here, love.
Oh, I go. Okay.
Got it?
Yes.
So
Can I just read?
just read it to yourself, Professor.
How would the frequency compare? I'm not sure about the frequency. Oh. Okay, I've now read that, yes.
It may be that you can't remember things as well now as in 2001 when you gave this evidence, but that would suggest that you used less concentrate per patient than other centres.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could remember why that was the case. Did you have a conservative approach to treating patients, do you think?
I didn't think so. It just became apparent when I compared my usage with usage at other centres that we were using less.
Okay.
It wasn't deliberate.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask you some questions now about hepatitis, about your evidence to the Lindsay Tribunal, and about some of the research that you did. We'll take it slowly and in stages. So
Okay.
within the document that you've got there, Professor, could you go, or could Mrs. Preston assist you to find page 29?
Is that it?
That's it on
Starting
the screen.
introduction of factor concentrates.
That's the page, thank you.
Here it is.
So I'm just going to read aloud some of your questions and answers and see if you've got anything to add, Professor. So at the top of the page, you were asked about whether it was appreciated that those concentrates, so factor concentrates, could be potentially infectious. This is in the 1970s when they were first introduced. Your answer was this: I think it was certainly appreciated by academics working in the area of virology, such as Professor Zuckerman. Initially, I don't think a great deal of thought was given to it when they were first introduced. And then the question is asked, and why would such an appreciation have been present at the time? And you answer, oh, it's been known for a long, long time before that blood and blood products could transmit viruses or could produce hepatitis. Are your answers there correct, Professor? Does that still remain your view?
I can't hear your question, I'm afraid.
I'm sorry, I'll try and speak more slowly.
Yes.
The two answers that I've just read out from your evidence record you saying that initially, when factor concentrates were first produced, you don't think a great deal of thought was given to the risks of infection. And then you said that it's been known for a long, long time before that blood and blood products could transmit viruses or could produce hepatitis.
Yes.
And I just wanted to check with you, are the answers you gave there, does that still remain your view?
Yes. Products nowadays are safer.
Yes.
But in general terms, the answer is still correct.
Okay. And then you also told the Lindsay Tribunal, and I'll summarise this. We don't need to look at the page unless you want to. You told the Lindsay Tribunal that haematologists in the early to mid 1970s were generally uninformed about details of chronic liver disease. Is that right?
Correct. It is correct.
And you also said to the Lindsay Tribunal that many haematologists were not fully conversant with the natural history of different types of chronic liver disease.
Correct.
And in your statement to our inquiry, you've suggested that might be because haematologists didn't receive training in disciplines relating to liver disease. Is that right?
Correct.
Now, if we will go back to the first page of the Lindsay Tribunal evidence. So if you, Mrs. Preston, if you could find page 1, please.
Very busy. It's a good thing you came.
You told me to stay at home.
So
Oh dear. Every man needs a woman.
So it's the bottom half of the first page.
Just a minute. Oh,
Of
come on,
course,
Vic.
sorry.
It's all right. The front page.
The first page, yeah.
What am I reading?
I don't know. It's on this page.
Is it on there?
So it's the bottom half of the page. Well, it's about the last 10 lines. And you say, we first began using clotting factor concentrates.
Right, yes.
Could we highlight that, please, Henry? Thank you.
Yeah, I can see that.
You can see that, great. So you said this. We first began using clotting factor concentrates for haemophiliacs in the mid-70s. And it was soon very noticeable that very many of these patients had abnormal liver enzymes. We didn't know what they meant or what they added up to, but they persisted and caused us some concern. At the time, I was already working very closely with a colleague, a hepatologist, Dr. Trigger, and also a consultant histopathologist with a special interest in liver disease. Can
Yes.
you remember the name of the consultant histopathologist? Was that Dr. Underwood?
That's correct. James Underwood.
Thank you. And so, is this right? You and Dr. Trigger and Dr. Underwood wanted to investigate what the causes were of these abnormal liver enzymes that you kept seeing.
Yes.
And so you published an article in the Lancet in 1978. Mrs. Preston, that will be document number 4 in the documents you have. Henry, it's PRSE 303622. So it's an article called Percutaneous Liver Biopsy and Chronic Liver Disease in Haemophiliacs. Have you got that, Professor?
Yes.
Great.
Yes, I've got that.
So we can see it was published in the Lancet in September 1978. And we can see the authors there include you, Dr. Underwood, Dr. Trigger, Professor Blackburn, and some others. And
Yes.
I'm just going to read aloud some of the passages from it, because this is an important piece of work, and then ask you a handful of questions about it.
Okay.
So the summary reads as follows. Systematic screening of 47 haemophiliacs in Sheffield revealed abnormal liver function tests in 36, 77%, with a tendency for these abnormalities to persist. To assess the importance of these abnormalities, percutaneous liver biopsy was carried out on 8 symptom-free patients under Factor VIII cover. A wide spectrum of chronic liver disease was demonstrated, including chronic aggressive hepatitis and cirrhosis. The liver pathology bore no relation to clinical history or to biochemical findings. Hepatitis B virus markers were common, but evidence suggests that this is not the only factor contributing to the development of liver disease. The high incidence of chronic liver disease seems to be a recent development and is probably related to factor concentrate replacement therapy. So just pausing there, Professor, because this summarises the article. Your conclusion in that last sentence tells us that you were observing a high incidence of chronic liver disease in your patients. Is that correct?
Yes.
And you were relating that to the use of factor concentrate therapy.
I didn't hear what you just said.
You were relating the high incidence of chronic liver disease to the use of factor concentrates.
Yes.
And then, if we go down to the heading patients, a little further down that page, we can see a description of how of the patients you selected. I'll just read that paragraph out. We assessed the frequency of liver disease in patients under our care by testing liver function in 47 patients with haemophilia. All patients had received factor VIII replacement therapy on at least one occasion during the preceding 12 months. Apart from this, selection was random. Persistent abnormalities over 6 months of liver function were noted in 25 patients, and 8 of these were selected for liver biopsy. The selected patients were well known to us and were considered to be intelligent and responsible. The degree of biochemical abnormality was not a factor in selection. All were symptom-free at biopsy. The full nature of the procedure was explained to each patient, and all 8 gave their written consent. So that tells us that you selected 8 patients of your patients who had persistent abnormalities for liver biopsy.
Yes.
And then if we go over the page, please.
Wait a minute. Slow.
Don't worry, that's why I'm here.
Oh, yes, I've got that. Thank you.
That's great. So I just wanted to, I'm not going to read out all the text of the article, but your article tells us that all of the 8 biopsy specimens showed either hepatitis or cirrhosis. And I just wanted to ask you about the table.
Where are you now? Where are you reading from?
So that's the top of the 3rd page, but I want to ask you about the table on the bottom of the 2nd page.
Oh, okay.
That's this table.
So
Okay. About the table.
table 2, data on 8 patients undergoing liver biopsy.
Yes.
And you've identified in the column on the right-hand side under the heading liver histology, with a number of descriptions. And I just wanted to ask you what those descriptions refer to and what they tell us. So micronodular cirrhosis is the first one. Do you see that?
Micronodular cirrhosis, yes.
So does that tell us that in that patient you observed on biopsy the presence of cirrhosis?
Would you say that again, please?
Does that tell us that in relation to that patient, patient 1, you observed signs of cirrhosis?
Yes.
You then, in relation to patient 2, described them as having chronic persistent hepatitis and granulomas.
Yes.
And then patient 3 is chronic aggressive hepatitis.
Right.
Could you tell us what the difference was in those terms as you used them at the time? What was chronic persistent hepatitis and what was chronic aggressive hepatitis?
Chronic aggressive hepatitis is much more serious than chronic persistent hepatitis. And at that time, it was believed that patients who had those patients who had chronic persistent hepatitis, this did not progress. But for chronic aggressive hepatitis, that type of hepatitis did progress.
Okay.
So chronic persistent hepatitis was less severe than chronic aggressive hepatitis.
Okay. And you were observing chronic aggressive hepatitis and cirrhosis in some of the patients that you biopsied?
Correct.
And then if we just then go to the 3rd page of this, so that's the last page.
We've got a very good secretary here.
Good.
I need a bunch of flowers.
Oh, a bottle of wine.
Bunch of flowers.
Yes, I've got that.
So under the heading discussion,
Yes.
if you go to the next main paragraph, which begins, "We confirmed earlier observations,"
Yes.
and if you go halfway down that paragraph, there's a sentence beginning, "We also found a wide spectrum of chronic liver disease." Do you have that?
Yeah, we've got that. Yes,
Great,
we
so I'll
also
just
know-
read that bit. "We also found a wide spectrum of chronic liver disease, including benign self-limiting chronic hepatitis,
Yes.
potentially treatable chronic aggressive hepatitis, and established cirrhosis."
Yes.
So those are your findings. "All our
Yes.
patients were symptom-free at biopsy, and it was impossible to differentiate between the different forms of liver disease on the grounds of biochemical abnormalities. Could you just explain what that sentence means?
Well, the impossible to differentiate.
Yes.
It was basically saying, by looking at results of liver function tests, you couldn't draw conclusions about the underlying liver disease. You couldn't say what it was, and in fact, you couldn't. All you could say is that there was evidence of liver disease, but you couldn't give any details, and you couldn't provide any details.
Okay, understood.
Correction.
And then you go on to say,
Didn't do that very well, did I?
No, that was perfectly clear, thank you. Since the patient's undergoing biopsy, this is how the paragraph continues, had been arbitrarily selected, it is reasonable to conclude that a large proportion of haemophiliacs receiving treatment with factor VIII have important chronic liver disease.
Yes.
And then we'll just go to the last paragraph of the article.
Yeah.
You say, we conclude that histological liver disease is common in haemophiliac patients. The nature and severity of these abnormalities can only be assessed by biopsy, which under suitable control can be carried out without undue risk. It is noteworthy that 2 patients with cirrhosis were mildly affected haemophiliacs requiring only occasional factor VIII transfusion. Such patients may perhaps benefit from the new developed synthetic and then DDAVP. Now,
yes.
A number of, or some witnesses, Professor, have told the inquiry that this article was an important landmark in the understanding of the risks of hepatitis.
Yes.
And I'm going to show you something that you said about this work.
About this work?
I'm going to show you something you said to a newspaper about this work. Mrs. Preston, it should be your document 27.
Whoa.
Don't worry, take your time. Henry, it's HSOC 309730.
Have that one, please. Keep it in order.
Okay. This one?
Yeah.
That one? 27?
I'll get it. That's it.
Henry, could we zoom into the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6th, 5th and 6th columns? So it's the column that begins heavily on imported factor VIII.
2, 4, 3, 4.
Yeah, what?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, columns.
Yeah, if you could, so we put it on screen if that's easier, Professor, or look at the hard copy.
Yeah.
It tells us.
Right. Yeah.
On it. There.
Wait a minute, sorry.
It's this one and this one.
So, which one?
This one.
Starting there.
So it's the bit down the bottom of that 6th column. It begins, Professor Eric Preston, a leading UK haemophilia expert, advised that it was safer to give those suffering from mild haemophilia a synthetic product called DDAVP. And then it says this, if we skip over a paragraph, Preston told the Observer, the argument has always been that the hepatitis risk was a small price to pay.
I remember that very clearly.
Yeah. But in 1978, we showed quite definitely that non-A, non-B was a very serious disorder. The Department of Health should have responded by pushing for ways to inactivate the virus in the blood or given patients the choice of an alternative.
Yes.
Now, I think you told the inquiry in your witness statement that this accurately sets out what you said to the newspaper and that this accurately reflects your views. Is that right?
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Do you have the date of that?
I'm sorry, sir.
article.
It's, I think it's the 21st of November 1999. That's what I've scribbled on it. I'll check.
Thank you.
Professor Professor Preston, we're going to move now to another document. So that one you can put that one away.
Good thing my wife's here.
So, Mrs. Preston, it should be your document number 6. Henry, it's HCDO 40554. It's the Hepatitis Working Party Minutes, 15th of December 1980.
Got it.
Great, thank you. So that we can see what this document is, it's minutes of the 8th meeting of the Haemophilia Centre Directors' Hepatitis Working Party, held at the Oxford Haemophilia Centre on December the 15th, 1980.
Yes.
And it's got a list of those present. It includes you, Professor Preston.
Yes.
If we go down towards the bottom of the page,
Yes.
there's a heading underlined, Chronic Hepatitis, Sheffield-Royal Free Collaborative Survey. Do you have that?
Yes.
And it says Doctors Kernoff and Preston presented their joint experience of the use of liver biopsy in the investigation of chronic liver disease in haemophiliacs.
Yes.
About 40 patients had been biopsied. And then it talks about some complications, including a death which occurred at the Royal Free Hospital. I don't need to ask you about that. But if we go to the next page, please, Professor.
Yes.
If I pick it up at the first new paragraph on that page, the results of liver biopsy showed that about a third of patients studied, do you have that?
Yes.
Had the histological appearances in their biopsy of chronic active hepatitis and 2/3 chronic persistent hepatitis. 3 patients had evidence of cirrhosis. Most patients were entirely symptomless. 1 patient at Sheffield had esophageal varices. So just to look at that in a little more detail and to see if I've understood it correctly, Professor Preston, a third of the patients, approximately, had the appearance of the more serious form of hepatitis, chronic active hepatitis. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. And then you've identified 3 patients with cirrhosis and 1 with esophageal varices. Can you remember anything more about that work that you and Dr. Kernoff were undertaking?
No.
Okay, fair enough.
Sorry, can I remember anything more about...
About the work, this collaborative survey that Sheffield and the Royal Free Hospital were undertaking?
Well, we carried on with an interest in liver disease in haemophilia. I can't say more than that.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think so. No, okay.
I'm going to ask you about one further document now, Professor, and then after that we'll have a break. So, the next document, Mrs. Preston, will be your document 8. 8. It's a 1982 article in the Lancet. Henry, it's PRSE 40384.
I'm good, aren't I? I didn't
brilliant.
realise
I didn't know
this
you'd done all
I didn't
this.
realise I had this in me. Yeah, I know. I think it's that.
So this is a letter to the Lancet in March of 1982, and the heading is Blood Product Concentrates and Chronic Liver Disease.
Yes.
And it's a letter written by you, Dr. Trigger and Dr. Underwood.
Yes.
And it says this: we've previously shown that there is a high incidence of chronic liver disease among patients receiving blood product concentrates, even in the absence of any symptoms. Non-A, non-B hepatitis viruses have been implicated. While the presence of chronic liver disease is now well established, there are no data on the rate or likelihood of progression. And then you go on to talk about a particular case, Professor Preston. A 34-year-old male with von Willebrand's disease had acute non-B hepatitis 2 weeks after receiving factor VIII concentrates. And you go on to give details of that, including a percutaneous liver biopsy was done with DDAVP cover. And in fact, I think you described 2 biopsies done using DDAVP. And then you say, and this is about halfway down that long paragraph, on this occasion there was very severe architectural disturbance with evolving cirrhosis. Features of non-A, non-B infection were still present. And then in the last paragraph you say, this case shows several important and disturbing features. We have detected significant progression of liver disease over 2.5 years in the absence of any symptoms. Clinical, serological, and histological evidence point to the disease being related to non-A, non-B hepatitis. As the patient has had no further blood products since the initial infusion which led to the hepatitis, we have good evidence that his progressive liver disease can be ascribed solely to a single infusion. Can you remember anything further now about this particular case and what prompted you to write about it, Professor?
No.
Okay, don't worry. You did tell you talked about this to the Lindsay Tribunal. I don't think I necessarily need to go back to what you told the Lindsay Tribunal, although we can if you like. Is it fair to assume that what you told the Lindsay Tribunal in 2001 is likely to have been accurate to the best of your ability at the time? Because you'd only just retired then.
Would you repeat that?
Yeah. You discussed this case when you gave your evidence to the Lindsay Tribunal. Is it fair to assume that what you told the Lindsay Tribunal will be the best evidence you can give us about this case, given that you now don't remember anything further?
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Well, we can look at the detail of what you told the Lindsay Tribunal if we need to, but you discussed it in some detail. So I note the time. I wonder whether this would be a good moment for Professor Preston to have a break for half an hour.
Yes, it would. Professor, we have a break every morning so that those here can have a tea or a coffee, and it also allows witnesses to have a break. So we'll take a break now, half an hour, so we'll be back at 11:30. So 11:30, please. Thank you, and thanks to Mrs. Preston as well.
And could Professor Preston be given the warning about not discussing his evidence?
Yes. Professor, it's something which I have to say to every witness who has a break in the middle of giving evidence. Don't discuss the evidence you have given or anything that you think you might later be asked with anyone, that includes your wife, but you can talk about anything else you like. I'll see you at 11:30. Thank you.
Thank you.